Have you ever imagined dying and coming back with an urgent message from Jesus about a devastating event that could hit the world at the end of June 2025? Have you ever wondered what happens when the sky sets a date and the spiritual clock starts ticking? In this video, you will hear the amazing story of Sarah Grayson, a woman who faced death and was taken on a supernatural journey where she saw the future of humanity and the choice between judgment and miracle. Prepare yourself for a breathtaking revelation, because what she witnessed could change everything. Like it now, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any videos like this, and comment below which city you are watching from. Let's spread this message before it's too late. My name is Sarah Grayson. I'm 38 years old, and until that day, I thought I understood what fear was. But what I felt the morning everything stopped, it didn't feel like human fear. It was like time itself had held its breath. I was driving down a back road in rural North Carolina when a semi-truck spun out of control on a curve and came straight at me. The sound of the impact was the last thing I heard with my physical ears. The rest can't be explained in ordinary words. My body was thrown, they said later, about 20 yards from the car. But all I felt was a displacement, as if something had been ripped out of me. Suddenly, everything went very still. It wasn't a normal silence, it was thick, alive, full of something watching me. The pain was gone. The screams were gone. I was suspended. It felt like I was floating, but not in the air. It was as if my soul had been released into a liquid light. This light enveloped me, warmed me, stripped me of all earthly weight. And then I realized I was leaving the world. I tried to scream, but I had no mouth. I tried to run, but I had no feet. Yet I felt no panic. I felt a presence. It was there before I saw it. A gentle but irresistible force was pulling me upward, and before I knew it, I was standing before a figure who needed no introduction. It was Jesus, not the Jesus of children's stories or the stained glass windows of churches. He was a presence that filled the entire space, made of pulsating light and peace and authority. His eyes, my God, his eyes, were like two suns, but I could look into them without burning. They saw everything. And yet they did not judge me. They felt with me. He didn't speak with his mouth. His voice came straight into me, as if my own spirit had generated it. And what he said changed everything. You need to see what's about to happen. Time is almost up. I could barely comprehend what he meant, but before I could react, the air around us tore apart. A portal of incandescent light opened, and there, in flaming letters that burned into my soul, was written, End of June 2025. The letters pulsed, alive, like the heartbeat of the sky itself. I shivered, not from the cold, but from something much deeper, a presentiment that something great and terrible was about to happen. It was then that Jesus reached out his hand and said, Come, you must see for yourself, the world must know. And I went. When I touched his hand, it was like stepping through time itself. It wasn't just a movement. It was like being sucked into a beating heart made of eternity. What lay before me felt like a hallway made of glass and fire. The walls vibrated with images, sounds, cries, and prayers, all at once, as if the entire world were being compressed into a single revelation. On the other side, I saw the sky darkening unnaturally, but this was no ordinary night. It was as if the very light was being taken from the earth. Jesus led me silently, and when we stopped, he pointed to something on the horizon. It was a giant calendar, hovering in midair, and what was marked with a pulsing red glow wasn't just a day, it was a period. The words End of June 2025 burned like living lava. Each letter felt alive. I felt as if they were being tattooed onto my soul. Why this date? I thought. The answer came before the question had fully formed. It's the portal. Everything will be decided by then. Suddenly, a window opened before us. No ordinary window, it was like a tear in time, allowing us to see a possible future. And that was when the pain began. The first scene was the United States, but not as we know it. It was a silent country. The cities were physically whole, but spiritually dead. I saw people wandering the streets with dull eyes, as if they were anesthetized. The skies were covered by a thick cloud, not made of water, but of a darkness that moved as if it had a will of its own. I saw New York plunged into absolute silence. There were no cars, no laughter, no hope, only a heavy, oppressive energy, that made the very air seem like a burden. Churches stood with their doors locked, covered in dust. Altars were empty, crosses thrown on the ground. And then I saw something that made me want to fall to my knees. Shepherds crying in secret, hidden, as if they had lost their voice. Children sitting in the dark, looking up at the sky in fear. And over every city, shadowy figures, made of smoke and anger, feeding on fear, apathy, and the absence of prayer. I saw America divided, not by politics or race, but by a deep spiritual divide. There were cities that were still lit up inside, small lights in the darkness, but most of them were in silence, in spiritual chaos. Jesus could not take his eyes off the scene. His pain was visible, but even there, he was still full of hope. They can still choose, but they need to know what's at stake. That's when the scenery changed again, and what I saw next still makes me wake up with my heart racing. As the next vision unfolded before me, it was as if the planet itself was trying to speak, but no one was listening. Jesus held my hand as the scene changed. We were above America, but it was no longer the same. What I saw now was what would happen if humanity ignored the call he had given me. The date still shone in the sky, end of June 2025, but now shrouded in dark smoke. It was as if time had been saturated with bad choices. The air had a heaviness that I could feel even without physical lungs. The first thing I noticed was the sound, a wailing sound. It wasn't a scream, it was deeper. It was the groan of creation, the sigh of the earth as it was being crushed. I saw the American soil crack, not as in an ordinary earthquake, but as if spiritual cracks had physically manifested themselves. Entire buildings remained standing, but the ground vibrated with an unseen instability, as if something very ancient was awakening beneath. People were running, but they didn't know where they were going. Some knelt in the middle of the street, looking up at the sky in despair. I saw families screaming each other's names, completely lost, not because they were physically separated, but because they could no longer recognize each other spiritually. There was a collapse of the collective soul. In coastal areas, the waters advanced without warning, not like a tsunami, but like a slow, persistent, inevitable invasion. The waves seemed to have a life of their own, and they brought with them not only destruction, but an almost mystical sense of judgment. People cried out for help, but help never came. I saw medical centers filled with chaos, but what shocked me the most was the emptiness in the churches. Some had been turned into warehouses, others into bars, but the scariest were the ones that were still functioning, but were cold. Pulpits empty of anointing, music empty of purpose, false lights hiding deep darkness. Jesus stood beside me. His eyes shone, but now with an intensity that mixed sadness and justice. He pointed to a town, I don't know which one, where a single woman was praying alone in a room. The town around her was dark, but her home was surrounded by light, an invisible, luminous dome, like a spiritual force field. The whole town was in ruins except for that home. Because of her, this part will be spared, and I understood. All it took was a willing heart. All it took was a bended knee. All it took was a single burning soul to stop the darkness from swallowing everything. But most weren't listening. They were too busy, too distracted, laughing at the urgency, calling the sacred madness, and the spiritual clock kept ticking. Each beat was like a hammer blow to my consciousness. The end of June was approaching, and the world still slept. I didn't know it was possible to miss something that was yet to come. But there, in the face of what Jesus showed me next, my spirit cried out for a reality that seemed as distant as a dream, and at the same time, as close as a sincere prayer. He touched my shoulder, and in an instant, the gloomy scene dissipated like smoke in the wind. In place of the chaos, a new window appeared, an alternative view of the same time, the end of June 2025, and the contrast was so violent, so moving, that my spiritual eyes filled with tears. I saw streets, the same streets that had once been deserted, now filled with people kneeling, their hands raised to the sky. There were tears, yes, but they were not tears of pain. They were tears of surrender. It was as if a wave of repentance had swept over hearts. I saw young people praying in tongues. I saw children with their eyes closed, in deep silence before makeshift altars. I saw families gathered around lit candles, and churches, once cold, throbbing like living hearts. In Washington, NDC, I saw something I will never forget. A column of light descended directly on the Capitol, enveloping the building in a kind of spiritual crown. It was as if heaven were placing its mark there, not of human power but of divine authority. And I knew this was the reality God intended. This was the chance, but only if there was surrender before the portal closed. The portal, he showed me. It was like a gap suspended between two realities. On the left, a barren, silent desert dominated by shadows. On the right, fields of flowers, filled with people smiling, singing, working side by side. But in the center, in the very center, was a line of fire and light, pulsing like a heart about to burst. Above this portal, the flaming inscription repeated itself. End of June, the moment of choice. That burned inside me. It was no ordinary date. It was a turning point in the ages. It was the last warning before the breakup. Jesus took me to the edge of openness. I felt the heat, the strength, the spiritual tension. It was like being at the birth of a cosmic baby. Either the world would be born again, or it would sink into oblivion. And then he spoke. The decision will not be made by governments, nor by kings. It will be made by those whom no one sees, those on their knees, those who seek me in the silence. If they cry out, I will come. In that moment I understood. It wasn't about crowds. It was about intensity. It was about truth, and time was running out. Immediately after the vision of the portal, I felt as if I was being taken into the heart of a warring person. It was as if Jesus wanted to show me what was behind the choices that seemed human, but were influenced by something deeper, invisible, and real. Suddenly, I was flying over a big city. I couldn't identify which one, because everything was shrouded in a dense and gray, almost sticky fog. It was as if the air itself was contaminated. The streets were full of people, but there was no life in their eyes. They walked quickly, like robots, with cell phones glued to their faces, unable to see each other. It was a multitude of bodies inhabited by absences. It was then that I saw it, hovering over the buildings, on the rooftops, on the streetlights. There were figures, shapeless creatures made of living darkness. Some seemed to have wings. Others were just shadows with flaming eyes. They moved among the people, whispering. I couldn't hear the words with my ears, but I could feel the poison they carried. Fear, exhaustion, doubt, distraction. These entities were everywhere, in homes, offices, schools. Some had taken up residence in churches, covering pulpits with invisible veils that muffled the divine presence. I saw a pastor trying to preach, but his voice wouldn't come out. The darkness around him swallowed up every word before it reached his listeners. And then I saw church members falling asleep in the middle of the service. Literally, as if they had been hypnotized. Jesus looked at me with pain in his eyes. These are the agents of silence. They feed on the absence of prayer. I felt a chill in my soul, and I understood. This wasn't just a battle against sin or against the distractions of modern life. This was a spiritual war on a global scale, and most people didn't even know they were on the battlefield. I saw the United States Congress surrounded by these entities. They laughed and mocked while decisions were being made. Some sat next to leaders, whispering in their ears. Others were in TV studios, influencing narratives. But the worst thing was seeing how many of these presences were inside homes. I saw parents fighting with their children, couples drifting apart, all because something invisible was creating division between them. And then Jesus pointed to a single woman. She was kneeling alone in the middle of the room. There were tears on her face and a holy book open before her. As she prayed, a soft light began to grow around the house. Slowly, the darkness receded. Shadows chafed, knocking against the windows, but they could not enter. This woman, Jesus said, is more powerful than 1,000 soldiers. Her prayer is a wall. Because of her, her entire neighborhood will be spared. And there I understood something that changed me forever. The world was disintegrating spiritually because many had stopped praying, and the end of June was getting closer and closer. After showing me the shadows that were plaguing the earth, Jesus squeezed my hand tightly. His touch was warm, firm, but full of compassion. The pain I felt at seeing so much darkness was almost unbearable. And then he said, "Now, see what happens when my people seek me." In an instant, everything around him changed. The sky, previously shrouded in spiritual smoke, now opened like curtains being torn from within. Golden rays descended upon several American cities, and wherever they touched, something incredible happened. I saw entire families kneeling in their living rooms, praying as if their lives depended on it, and they did. I saw teenagers preaching in the hallways of their schools, with tears in their eyes and fire in their voices. I saw churches that were once empty suddenly fill up, not because of marketing, but because of the genuine cry. In Los Angeles, thousands gathered outside movie studios, not to protest but to intercede. In New York, Times Square had become a makeshift altar, with praise echoing between the skyscrapers. And in Dallas, an entire stadium vibrated with collective worship, as if heaven itself were descending upon the place. I saw Jesus smile. For the first time, I saw a glimpse of relief in his eyes. And then, something supernatural happened. The sky answered. Above the cities, fissures of light opened like heavenly cracks. From them descended glowing figures, angels, but not as we imagine them. They were made of living light, with eyes like embers and wings that unfolded in 1,000 hues. Each angel that touched the ground released a wave of healing, liberation, and transformation. I saw entire neighborhoods being swept away by these waves. People who had been deeply depressed were waking up with new eyes. Sick people in hospitals were sitting up, smiling. I saw doctors kneeling beside beds, unable to explain what they were witnessing. Jesus looked at me and said, "These are the fruits of obedience. The world can be rebuilt if everyone does their part before the portal closes." That phrase stuck with me. It was more than a promise. It was an instruction. He wasn't talking about grand political movements or system changes. He was talking about prayer, about intimacy, about quiet, true surrender. And then I saw the celestial clock reappear overhead. Now one of the hands had begun to move, slow, steady, each second like a sigh from heaven. In the center glowed the date, end of June 2025. But now, not in red, but in gold. It was as if time still had a chance. But it all depended on the response of those who were listening now, who were praying now. And the sound I heard, coming from the earth, was just one. Lord, we are still here, and we are praying. The vision that followed was one of the most shocking of the entire experience. Jesus took me to what seemed to be the nerve center of eternity. It was a room with no walls or ceiling, made only of light and sound. In the center of it hovered a gigantic clock, but not like the ones we know. This clock had no numbers or ordinary hands. It was throbbing. With each beat, a wave of energy spread throughout creation. It was as if time was alive. And then I saw it. In the middle of the dial, in letters of pure fire, was written, End of June 2025. This was not just a date. It was a point of collision between human choices and divine decisions. The clock's hand was moving slowly but surely. Each advance seemed to carry the result of billions of thoughts, decisions, and prayers. It was as if the collective soul of humanity was directly influencing the rhythm of that divine mechanism. Jesus looked at me with a seriousness that pierced. This clock is connected to the hearts. Every sincere prayer delays judgment. Every indifference hastens the end. It was then that I realized something terrifying. With each pulse, a soul was lost. It was as if each second was an unheard scream, a muffled clamor, and where there should have been hands, there was a red thread of living light, moving like blood, pure, intense, pulsating. Each oscillation made me shiver, but the most shocking thing was yet to come. Jesus reached out and showed me a spiritual field connected to the clock. I saw names appearing and disappearing like sparks. I saw entire cities being marked as ready or indifferent. Some had walls of light around them, the fruit of constant intercession. Others were exposed, naked, like open wounds in the spirit of the world. I saw a child praying in the middle of the night, alone, with a blanket over her head. When she said the name of Jesus with her eyes closed and her heart on fire, the hand slowed down, just for a second, but it slowed down. That small gesture had eternal weight. I also saw the opposite, people mocking, laughing, calling it all religious hysteria. Some even inside churches, worrying more about lights and stages than about souls. And, in those moments, the needle accelerated. The red became denser, time shorter. Jesus pointed again to the inscription on the clock. End of June, the day the clock decides. I understood. It wasn't about prophecy. It was about participation. Every human being was a cog. Every choice, a rotation. And the clock, that living mechanism, responded to the invisible sum of it all. And I was almost reaching the point of no return. Soon after the celestial clock began to tick more strongly, I was pulled into a new space, a kind of spiritual panorama of Earth. This was not a typical view of the planet, as seen in satellite images. It was as if I were seeing through God's eyes, not the physical forms of cities, but their spiritual structures. I saw the United States from above, and each city was marked with a floating word. It wasn't a name, nor a coordinate. It was a state of spiritual consciousness. Some said, alert, ready, indifferent, rebel, others, simply, at war. The cities that were marked prepared glowed softly, not with electric light, but with a spiritual clarity that seemed to emerge from homes, churches, and hearts. It was as if ancient prayers, said in silence, had left seeds of protection. I saw small groups gathering in the early hours of the morning. I saw mothers praying over their children's pillows. I saw pastors who, even in small and forgotten churches, kept the altar lit. But all around were vast areas covered in darkness. And the most distressing thing was to see the number of cities labeled as indifferent. They were the most silent. There was no spiritual warfare in them, because there was no resistance. I saw demons walking the streets, calmly, entering and leaving houses, whispering lies, sowing confusion. In some of these cities, I saw churches completely closed. Others were open but empty. In Seattle, a church that looked beautiful on the outside was rotting on the inside. And in Miami, I saw celebrations that were full of glitter but devoid of substance, as if people were dancing on a floor that had already begun to open up. I saw Las Vegas covered in an acidic cloud, like a spiritual desert that consumed even the air. But even there, I saw something that broke me inside. A young woman kneeling alone, praying with a fervor that cracked the ground around her. Tears fell from her eyes and turned to light as they touched the ground. And around her, a protective bubble formed, pushing back the darkness. For her sake, said Jesus, this city has not yet been given up. He also showed me entire regions where angels were in formation, armed but motionless, waiting, each one positioned as if awaiting a divine order to intervene, but they would not act without a trigger, and that trigger was prayer. Jesus looked at me and said in a deep voice, the forces are positioned, but heaven awaits the cry of earth. I felt like the end of June was no longer just a future date. It was an invisible line that was getting closer by the second, and many cities were still asleep. The next vision was no less intense. It was perhaps the most moving. I saw that even amid the darkness and apathy, an army was emerging, but it was not an army with weapons or uniforms. It was made up of men, women, children, young people, old people, ordinary people, invisible to the world but powerful before heaven. They were the awakened ones. I saw cities like Houston, Atlanta, and San Diego being surrounded by columns of spiritual fire. Not destructive fire, but purifying fire. It was as if heaven was responding directly to a specific kind of prayer, one that came from the depths of the spirit, without masks, without pretensions. A naked and true cry. These columns of light appeared where people gathered to pray without expecting recognition, in hidden places, sometimes in total silence. I saw groups of teenagers gathering in open fields, praying hand in hand. I saw mothers pushing strollers as they murmured prayers through the streets. I saw artists who abandoned the stage to sing on street corners only for the sky to hear. Jesus showed me a tiny church in California. Once abandoned, it was now teeming with people. There was no stage, no spotlights, just a torn carpet, a simple cross, and broken hearts. But the glory of God filled the place with a presence that made the angels dance. And then I saw, the clock stops. High above, that eternal clock, made of light and blood, simply ceased its movement. An absolute silence filled the sky, not as before, a silence of mourning, but of waiting. It was as if time had been suspended, as if judgment itself had stopped to observe what God's people were doing. I saw demons fleeing, screaming, as if they were being burned by the growing light. I saw attempts to assassinate being foiled by miraculous coincidences. I saw tornadoes deviating from their original paths, fires extinguishing without explanation, It was as if the earth were being touched by invisible hands of mercy. Jesus said to me, "They are winning battles they didn't even know existed. Because of them, the clock has stopped." But he was also clear. There were still regions that were asleep. I saw cities that ignored everything, people celebrating empty distractions, scoffing at warnings, living as if nothing was going to happen. And Jesus whispered, "Light can spread, but you need someone to carry it there." I felt a weight of responsibility, not just on myself, but on everyone who was waking up. The sky was reacting, but the window was still open, and time, even though it had stopped for a moment, had not been canceled. The date was still engraved in the center of the clock, end of June 2025. The portal still pulsed, and the sky waited for the next knee to bend. The sky began to change, not violently, but with a kind of solemnity that made even my spirit tremble. It was as if the universe was preparing for the final scene, the last chance. I felt small, like dust inside something grand and eternal. Jesus led me to a place that looked like a courtroom, but there were no accusers or judges, just a huge table made of living light. Above it hovered names, millions of names. They appeared, they flashed, they disappeared. Each name was a prayer, a decision, a choice. Jesus remained silent for a few seconds. The sound that filled the room was like a sacred drum, beating in rhythm with human decisions. Then he said to me, "At this very moment, billions are choosing without knowing it. Every gesture, every thought, every silence counts." I was then taken back to earth, but in a different way. I was seeing with the eyes of heaven, as if I could feel the spiritual weight of each home, of each city. I saw families sleeping while the spiritual world roared around them. I saw demons prowling homes, trying to get in, and I saw mothers waking up in the middle of the night, without understanding why, but it was the Holy Spirit calling. Jesus pointed to a flaming red line that ran across the globe. It began in Eastern Europe, passed through Jerusalem, crossed the oceans, and ended in the United States. Above it pulsed a word like a cosmic seal, intervention. And then he explained, "If prayer breaks that line, the miracle will be released. If not, judgment will spread." At that moment, I saw a scene I will never forget. A crowd dressed in white marching silently through the streets. They did not shout, they did not hold signs, they simply prayed. Some voices whispered psalms, others cried out in tongues. I saw artists, ex-criminals, teenagers, businessmen, even newly converted atheists, all of them with eyes on fire. They weren't walking of their own accord. It was as if they were being led by something greater, led by the Spirit. And wherever they went, judgment receded, tornadoes disappeared, disease epidemics ceased. Entire neighborhoods were bathed in a soft glow, a spiritual march like no other. Jesus looked at me deeply. These are the awakened ones. They heard my call. They positioned themselves before the appointed day. Then he pointed to the sky one last time. Among the clouds I saw a flaming inscription forming, "End of June, the day of choosing." That sentence stuck with me. It wasn't a threat, it was an invitation, a summons. The last one before the portal closed. Before returning me to earth, Jesus said, "They need to know, they need to choose. Tell them that heaven has already set the day." And then I was thrown back into my body with a jolt. The physical pain was intense, but the spiritual weight was even greater. Since then, every beat of my heart has been a silent reminder. Time is running out. The portal is about to close, and the choice cube is in our hands. If you liked this beautiful spiritual testimony, leave a like, comment your impressions, subscribe to the channel, and don't forget to activate the notification bell to watch each new video and help us spread this message to a greater number of people. Until next time.